When I poured the last bag of gravel outside my brand new barn, sweat soaking through my shirt, I heard the high-pitched screech of tires and knew peace was about to end. Again. That's when Veronica Haskins, head of the Oak Ridge Pines HOA and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac, marched up my gravel drive like she owned the place. "You built that thing on HOA property, Kyle," she barked, jabbing her acrylic nail toward my barn. "It violates 3 ordinances, and I'll have it torn down by next week." I set down the shovel and turned toward her slowly. "It's my property, Veronica. I had it surveyed before I even broke ground." She crossed her arms so hard I thought she'd dislocate a shoulder. "Well, our records show your property ends 10 feet back. That monstrosity is sitting on HOA-maintained land." I should have known she'd try something like this. Ever since I moved into the neighborhood last year and refused to join the HOA, she's been treating me like a rogue outlaw. I built the barn for my tools and my old 1972 Bronco restoration project, perfectly within my rights. But that didn't matter to Veronica, not when she smelled controls slipping through her polyester-clad fingers. "Funny," I said, pulling out a rolled-up document from my pickup's dash. "Because this says otherwise." She snatched the paper like a raccoon going after a hot dog, squinting at the official seal. "This isn't valid. We've got our own maps." "Then let's settle this the right way," I said. "I'll bring in the county surveyor, get it all marked again." "If I'm wrong, I'll tear it down. If you're wrong." "You'll apologize," she shot back. I stared at her. "No, if you're wrong, you'll be explaining to the board why you tried to claim my land." She huffed, turned on her heel, and stormed off with her little rat dog yapping behind her. But I wasn't done. Because while she thought she was cornering me, she didn't realize what I'd already noticed on the old blueprints, her precious HOA pool. The one they just spent nearly $50,000 repainting and fencing. It wasn't on HOA land either. It was on mine. And I had the receipts. 2 days after Veronica's little drive-by declaration of war, a white Ford Ranger with a faded county seal pulled up to my property. Out stepped Gerald Langston, the county surveyor, holding a weathered clipboard and wearing a straw hat that looked like it had seen 3 decades of summers. I met him halfway down the drive. "You the guy with the barn and the HOA problem?" he asked, squinting at me through a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. "That's me," I said, handing him a copy of the original land deed with the boundary lines clearly marked. "I'd like everything reflagged. North-south the full lot, especially the back edge near that concrete pad." He nodded, already unfolding a long tape measure and checking his equipment. "Been hearing about Oak Ridge Pines for years, never had a good cal out here." I didn't say much after that. Gerald worked quietly, planting stakes along the edges of my property while referring back to the county's GIS maps and the deed I'd given him. An hour in, he paused near the trimmed hedges that separated my lot from the HOA-maintained park. "You see this?" he asked, pointing to a red-painted rebar rod sticking barely 2 inches out of the ground. "That's an original survey pin, probably been here since the neighborhood was developed." He moved 20 feet west near the corner of the pool fence. Another pin, then another. His brow furrowed. "Hate to say it," he muttered, "but this pool isn't just a foot or 2 over the line. It's a good 27 feet onto your land, and the pump house, that's practically dead center." I didn't celebrate, not yet. I just took a photo of each pin and made sure Gerald signed the final survey sheet with the date and county stamp. Then I walked him back to his truck. "Want me to file this with the zoning office?" he asked. "Already done," I said. "Just needed the official confirmation." "Thanks for your time." Once he was gone, I printed 4 copies of the new survey and dropped one off at the county clerk's office for public record. The second went into a sealed envelope mailed directly to the HOA board's legal counsel. The third I kept in a fireproof lockbox. The fourth. That one I dropped off in person. Veronica wasn't home when I rang the doorbell, but her husband, Walt, opened the door wearing a polo shirt tucked into jeans like he was about to sell me a used boat. "You again," he said, holding the screen door half closed with his foot. "Just returning some paperwork," I replied, slipping the envelope through the gap. "You'll want to read that before Monday's board meeting." He didn't respond, just took the envelope like it was ticking. That weekend, things got interesting. Saturday morning, I noticed a few HOA committee members walking around the pool with measuring tapes and clipboards of their own. They didn't acknowledge me. Sunday, a landscaping crew showed up and started trimming bushes along the park's edge, quietly pulling them away from the property line and tossing them into a trailer. Someone was nervous. On Monday morning, I got a letter. Certified. It was from the HOA's attorney. They were proposing a mutual easement agreement, allowing them to continue using the portion of land under the pool in exchange for a modest annual fee of $400. The tone was polite, calculated. They were trying to get ahead of the inevitable. I didn't respond. Instead, I showed up to the open board meeting that evening with a folder and a flash drive. The community center was packed, more residents than usual. Word had clearly spread. I waited until new business came up and raised my hand. Veronica's voice was tight. "Yes, Kyle, I'd like 5 minutes. I think the community deserves to see some documents I've uncovered." A few board members exchanged glances, but none of them objected. I walked to the front, plugged in the flash drive, and pulled up a map with the new boundary lines overlaid on a satellite image. I explained the surveyor's findings, showed photos of the pins, and read aloud from the original deed. Then I dropped the hammer. The HOA pool, pump house, and a portion of the walking trail sit entirely on my property. That means the HOA has been using privately owned land for over 12 years without a lease, permit, or compensation. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Veronica's face was pale. Her pen slipped from her hand and clattered to the laminate floor. I kept going. According to county records, there was never a land transfer. No easement. No agreement, which means any money spent on maintenance, fencing, or renovations was used on land you don't legally control. That's a problem. One of the board members, a man named Dennis who usually sat silent behind his laptop, cleared his throat. "Are you suggesting litigation?" I didn't blink. "Not yet, but I am filing a formal cease and desist." Effective immediately, the HOA is to stop using or accessing any part of my property. That includes the pool. A woman in the back stood up. "Wait. We just paid $30,000 for new decking." Another voice shouted, "Did they even check the property lines before building it?" It turned into a low static of outrage. Veronica tried to regain control. "We can handle this internally," she said, tapping her gavel once. "There's no need for threats." I opened my folder and held up a copy of the letter from their lawyer. "Your attorney already admitted the violation by offering a settlement. That's not internal, that's legal." By now, 3 board members were visibly panicking. Dennis looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I finished with this. "If the HOA doesn't vacate the pool area by next Friday, I'll bring in a land use attorney and file for trespassing damages." That includes backdated use, which according to my math and county averages, comes out to roughly $22,000. The room exploded. Residents were yelling, demanding answers. I walked out before the meeting ended. The next day, I found a note duct taped to the community bulletin board by the pool gate. It read, "Pool closed until further notice by order of the HOA board." That afternoon, a city inspector came by. Apparently someone, probably one of the more nervous board members, had tried to reclassify the pool as a public amenity to delay the closure. But without a legal claim to the land, the city had no choice but to shut it down pending a full investigation. The cherry on top came Thursday morning when I got a call from Officer Linda Mays. "We've had a complaint filed from the zoning office," she said. "Apparently some false documents were submitted by the HOA years ago to get approval for the pool's expansion. You mind coming down to make a statement?" I didn't mind at all. Turns out those maps Veronica had been waving around, they'd been altered, slightly but enough. The original developer's signature had been photocopied and reused, and the land boundaries redrawn by someone with just enough knowledge to make it look legitimate. The zoning office never caught it until now: forgery, fraud, misuse of community funds. By Friday, Veronica was no longer HOA president. She resigned for personal reasons, though no one missed the 2 squad cars parked outside her house that morning, or the fact that the HOA treasurer, her cousin, had also disappeared from the board. As for me, I fenced off the area around the pool with temporary construction barriers and posted a sign: "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I didn't need the pool, but I needed them to remember they couldn't just take what wasn't theirs. And now the whole neighborhood knew it. By the following Monday, a quiet unease had settled over Oak Ridge Pines. Lawns still got trimmed, sprinklers still clicked on at dawn, but the neighborhood moved differently: quieter, cautious. The pool closure had left a vacuum, and everyone knew why. People didn't wave as quickly anymore. Garage doors stayed shut longer, but I wasn't watching the neighbors. I was watching the HOA board. On Wednesday morning, I filed an official request with the county records office for any and all permit applications submitted by the Oak Ridge Pines HOA over the last 15 years. I had a hunch, and I was done playing defense. 3 days later, the file arrived in a thick manila envelope. I laid it out on my kitchen table and began flipping through photocopies: renovation permits, landscape adjustments, an electrical upgrade for the clubhouse, but one document stood out. It was a permit request for the pool expansion from 8 years ago, submitted by the then HOA secretary. The weird part? The attached map had no county watermark. The boundary lines were drawn in faint pencil, and the signature in the lower right corner. It belonged to someone who hadn't worked in the zoning office since 2006. I drove to the zoning department first thing Monday and showed the page to a clerk named Reggie. He adjusted his glasses, held the form up to the light, and frowned. "This isn't one of ours," he said. "We haven't used this template in over a decade, and that signature, yeah, I remember Janice. Retired years ago. This is fake." I asked how something like that could have been approved. He shook his head. If it was submitted during a backlog, it might have slipped through the cracks. Especially if someone filed it directly with a junior clerk. But that's forgery. And if they used it to spend HOA funds, that's misappropriation. I thanked him and walked straight to the sheriff's substation. By Thursday afternoon, 2 investigators were assigned to the case. I handed over everything: the altered forms, the survey results, the lawyer's letter, and the property deed. They didn't need much more. The forged signature alone was enough to open a formal investigation under county code. That same day, I noticed a moving truck parked outside the treasurer's house. No goodbye, no announcement, just a quiet disappearance. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following week, but it never happened. Instead, residents received a formal notice in the mail. The board was being dissolved temporarily under Emergency Provision 4.7b of the Oak Ridge Pines Charter. A temporary receiver appointed by the county would be taking over all operations pending an audit. I didn't even know that was possible. But it got better. 1 week later, I was visited by a plainspoken man named Alan Mendoza, a private forensic accountant hired by the county. He asked if I'd be willing to go over the timeline of events again and answer a few questions. "Happy to," I said, motioning him toward the kitchen table. "You'll want coffee. This gets weird." Alan took meticulous notes while I talked, never interrupting, just nodding occasionally, tapping his pen against the edge of his notebook. When I showed him a photo of the original pool layout from the developer's brochure, he leaned forward. "See that?" he said, pointing at the eastern edge. "This version of the pool was never approved. They submitted a modified plan, but they never got it properly recorded. There's a gap in the approval chain. That's a big deal." "How big?" I asked. "Depends," he said. "If they used homeowner dues to fund construction based on a forged permit, that's embezzlement. If they knew the pool was on private land and kept spending money on it, that's fraud. And if anyone profited personally, they did," I cut in. The treasurer owned the renovation company that did the fencing. Her cousin's name was on the invoice. Alan blinked once, then started writing faster. By the end of that week, subpoenas were issued for several former board members, Veronica included. The news broke the following Monday, just after sunrise. A local reporter caught wind of the investigation and ran a segment titled "Luxury Pool, Stolen Land," with a drone shot of the empty HOA pool now sealed off with temporary fencing. The footage zoomed in on one of my signs. My phone lit up for hours. By Thursday, I was sitting in a conference room at the county courthouse as a witness for the grand jury hearing. The prosecutor asked only a few questions: how I discovered the boundary issue, how I obtained the survey, and whether I had reason to believe the HOA board acted knowingly. They threatened to tear down my barn based on fake maps, I said. They knew exactly what they were doing. When the hearing ended, the prosecutor shook my hand. You just saved your neighbors from a much bigger mess. If this had gone unnoticed another year, they'd be on the hook for every dollar. I walked out into the parking lot feeling something I hadn't felt since this started: relief. 2 weeks later, the county issued a formal statement. The former treasurer and Veronica were being brought up on charges of wire fraud, forgery, and misuse of community funds. The total estimated damages, just over $86,000. The community, now under interim county management, held a town hall meeting in the gymnasium of the local elementary school. Over 100 residents showed up, more than any HOA meeting had ever seen. A woman named Carla, who lived 3 blocks over and had never spoken to me before, stood up and addressed the room. We were lied to, she said, voice shaking. They used our dues like a private piggy bank, and Kyle, he stopped them. We owe him more than we realize. I didn't say anything. Just listened. Then Dennis, the same quiet board member who'd once looked ready to crawl under the table, stood up and proposed something unexpected. We've been given the option to dissolve the HOA entirely, he said. Given the corruption, the fraud, and the fact that most of our amenities are non-functional or built illegally, I say we take it. Let's dissolve it and rebuild from scratch, if we rebuild at all. The vote passed 82-17. Just like that, Oak Ridge Pines became an HOA-free neighborhood. A week later, I moved the Barnes Bronco project out into the sun and finally fired up the engine for the first time. The rumble echoed down the drive, clean and proud. Someone drove past and gave me a thumbs up, then another. The next day, a neighbor dropped off a tray of homemade cinnamon rolls with a note that read, "Thanks for standing your ground when the rest of us were too scared." I didn't need thanks, I just wanted peace. I got that and then some. The pool, still drained, still fenced off. The county was working through how to repurpose it, but they'd already confirmed it would be permanently closed. As for my barn, it stood exactly where I built it on my land, next to my gravel drive, untouched and unquestionably mine. Justice had a funny way of working in this town. But when it showed up loud. 3 weeks after the HOA officially dissolved, life in Oak Ridge Pines began to resemble something close to normal. Kids rode bikes without getting ticketed for riding without reflectors. Lawn chairs started popping up on front porches again, and people started talking to each other, really talking. Not in whispers, not in passing, but openly. It was like the neighborhood had taken a long breath and finally exhaled. I was installing a set of reclaimed oak shelves inside the barn when a knock echoed from the frame. I stepped around the Bronco to find a man in a dark blue suit with a badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Special Agent Nolan with the State Bureau of Investigations. He was accompanied by a stern-looking woman in a slate-gray pantsuit state auditor's office. "Mr. Carter, we're following a financial trail connected to the Oak Ridge Pines Homeowners Association." "Some new evidence has surfaced," Nolan said. I motioned toward the folding chairs just outside the barn. "You'll want to sit down for this." They already knew about the forged documents and the illegal pool construction, But what they didn't know, and what I was about to show them, was what I found in the HOA's archived online payment portal. After the board was dissolved, the county had given me temporary read-only access to the HOA's digital records to assist in the audit. I'd spent 2 nights digging through PDF invoices, bank ledgers, and correspondence logs. I pulled out a black binder and flipped to a page marked with a red tab. Payment to Blue Sky Property Maintenance, dated March 17th. $21,000 for what's listed as perimeter shrub enhancement. That's not a real service. The auditor leaned in. Where'd the funds come from? General dues account. But here's the kicker. I turned another page. The EIN listed on the invoice. It traces back to a shell company registered in Nevada to a post office box. Guess who opened that box? Nolan's eyes narrowed. Veronica Haskins. No, I said. Her husband, Walt. He registered it under his middle name and maiden mother's surname, but the connection's there. I found a scanned utility bill inside the company registration packet. The auditor flipped through the binder, her expression unreadable. Do you know how many transactions like this exist? 17, I said. Roughly $138,000 over 6 years, all routed through fake services, all signed off by either Walt or the former treasurer. Nolan stood. This changes the scope of the investigation. We're adding fraud and racketeering to the charges. That afternoon, a search warrant was executed at the Haskins house. The block was swarmed with unmarked sedans and plainclothes officers. Neighbors gathered in clumps on sidewalks, watching as boxes of documents, electronics, and financial records were carried out. Walt was led to the back seat of a cruiser in cuffs. No one said a word. No one protested. Veronica was nowhere to be seen. Turns out she had fled the county 2 days earlier. But she'd left behind a trail the State Bureau followed all the way to a short-term rental in Clearwater, Florida. She was arrested in a grocery store parking lot just shy of midnight, extradited the next day. With the fraud charges now encompassing financial misappropriation, forgery, and embezzlement from a non-profit entity, the case was handed off to the state attorney general's office. A grand jury indicted both Walt and Veronica on 12 felony counts each. The community was stunned. Not because they didn't believe it, but because they hadn't seen it sooner. The HOA had always seemed overbearing, but not criminal. Now the truth was out. The organization that once fined a man for planting tomatoes had been laundering money through phantom landscaping. The interim receiver held a final town meeting before handing control back to the residents. I sat quietly in the back, not wanting to draw attention, but after the speaker wrapped up, a few folks turned toward me anyway. "I heard you built that barn yourself," said an older man with a thick mustache and a veteran's ball cap. "Guess you didn't just build a barn, you built a case." I shook his hand. Just wanted to be left alone, didn't think it'd blow open a crime ring. A younger woman stepped forward. "We've been talking. Some of us want to start a neighborhood council, not an HOA, nothing with power, just a group that looks out for each other. You interested?" I hesitated. "Long as nobody tells me what color I can paint my tool shed, I'm listening," she laughed. Fair enough. The next few months brought real change. Without the HOA draining resources, the community's budget was restructured into a voluntary association strictly advisory. No fines, no enforcement, just coordination for things like bulk trash pickup and holiday lights. The old pool. The county sealed it permanently. With my permission and a lease drafted on my terms, they repurposed the surrounding lot into a public green space. No HOA involvement, just a picnic area and a small dog run. I kept the land, they handled the upkeep. That lease paid for half the barn's solar install. Veronica and Walt's trial took place the following spring. I testified for about 20 minutes, presenting the binder and walking the court through each transaction. The defense tried claiming administrative oversight, but the prosecutor shut that down with a bank statement bearing Walt's signature and a check written to himself. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Both were convicted. Veronica received 8 years with 5 mandatory. Walt got 6, plus restitution and a 10-year ban on holding fiduciary roles in any organization. The judge called their actions a betrayal of public trust wrapped in garden-variety greed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Justice had done what justice was supposed to do. Back in Oak Ridge Pines, spring rolled in like it had something to prove. Wildflowers pushed through sidewalk cracks. A retired plumber converted his garage into a pop-up bike shop for the neighborhood kids. Someone started a weekend coffee stand on their driveway. Nobody asked for permission. Nobody needed it. One afternoon, I stood in the barn doorway, watching the sun drop behind the trees. The Bronco sat gleaming under a new coat of paint, the oak shelves lined with tools, not paperwork. I could hear kids laughing in the distance, probably near the green space that used to be a monument to HOA overreach. A man in overalls from 2 streets over stopped by with a 6-pack and a question about wiring his chicken coop. We worked on the plans at my workbench for 2 hours. That's what Oak Ridge Pines had become, a place where neighbors helped neighbors, not harass them. The battles were over. The fences stayed up not to divide, but to protect, and the barn. It stood taller than anything the HOA ever built. Not because of its size, but because of what it represented, a line they couldn't cross, and a man who wouldn't let them.